stop fighting your mind. There is a question a certain kind of therapist will ask when you say you want to stop feeling anxious. They will not ask how long it has been going on. They will not ask what triggers it. They will ask something that sounds, at first, like a trick. What if the wanting to stop is the problem? Not the anxiety, the fight against it. Pain is not optional. That is the first thing these two traditions agree on. A therapy built inside an American psychology department, and a discourse preserved in Pali for 25 centuries. Neither one promises you a life without pain. Both would tell you that anyone selling you that is lying. What is optional? And this is the claim that will either annoy you or change something, is almost everything you add on top of it. Two roads. Neither one knew the other existed, and they arrived from opposite directions on the same small piece of ground. Chapter 1. Imagine a man walking across a field and someone shoots him with an arrow. That is bad. That is a real injury in a real body, and there is nothing philosophical about it. Now imagine that a moment later, right afterward, before he has even fallen, someone shoots him with a second arrow, 2 arrows, 2 wounds, twice the pain. That is the central image of a short discourse called the Salatha Sutta, SN 36.6. The word sala means arrow or dart or thorn, something that goes in and stays in. And this image is not a later teacher's illustration added on to explain the text. It is the sutta's own. Here is what it says. When an untrained, ordinary person is touched by a painful feeling, he sorrows, he grieves, he laments. In Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation, he beats his breast, becomes distraught. And so he feels 2 pains, physical and mental, just as if a man was shot with an arrow and then right afterward shot with another one. Then the discourse describes a second person, someone who is trained. This person is touched by exactly the same painful feeling, and here is the part almost everyone misses. The pain does not go away. He feels it. He simply does not sorrow, grieve, or lament. He feels one pain, physical but not mental. 1 arrow instead of 2. It would be easy to hear that and think, stoic, grit your teeth, feel nothing. That is not what the text says, and the difference matters more than almost anything else in this video. The trained person in this discourse is not numb. He has not gone somewhere else. The first arrow lands, and it hurts, and he knows that it hurts. What is absent is not the sensation. What is absent is the second thing, the mental event that arrives on top of the sensation, so fast and so automatic that most of us have never once in our lives experienced the first arrow by itself. Ask yourself when you last felt a physical pain, a headache, a knee, a back that has been bad for years, without any of the commentary, without not again. Without this is going to ruin the week, without the small private resentment toward your own body for doing this to you. That commentary is the second arrow. And notice, nobody shot it at you. The discourse does not stop there. And what comes next is the part that almost never gets quoted, which is a shame, because it is the sharpest thing in the text. Having been struck by that painful feeling, the untrained person does something specific. He turns toward pleasure. He delights in sensuality. And the sutta says why, in a line worth hearing twice. Because the untrained person does not discern any escape from painful feeling aside from sensuality. Sit with that for a moment, because it is not a moral complaint. It is not saying that pleasure is wicked or that comfort is a failing. It is making a claim about knowledge. The reason a person reaches for the drink, the screen, the second helping, the argument, the scroll at 2 in the morning, is not that he is weak. It is that he has never found another door out of the room. Pain arrives. The only exit he knows is pleasure. So he takes it. The trained person, the text says, discerns an escape from painful feeling that is not sensuality. That single clause is doing enormous work, and it is going to matter again in about 10 minutes when we look at what a clinical psychologist working from data with no interest in this discourse and no knowledge of it concluded about why human beings run. One correction before we leave this text, because you have almost certainly met the line. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. It is a good line. It is on posters, in a great many talks, printed in a great many books. It is not in this sutta. It is not, as far as anyone has been able to trace, anything the Buddha said. It appears to be a modern formulation out of mindfulness culture, and it has floated loose enough that it also gets attached to the novelist Haruki Murakami. The rule here is simple. If the Buddha did not say it, we do not put it in his mouth, however well it travels. And the discourse is more interesting than the slogan anyway. The slogan says suffering is optional. The sutta says something more precise and more useful, that the second arrow is not fired by the world. Now leave the field and the arrow and go to a faculty meeting in North Carolina in the autumn of 1978. A young assistant professor is sitting at the table. He is 29. It comes to his turn to speak, and something happens that he will spend the rest of his professional life trying to understand. He cannot speak. His heart is hammering. He is convinced he is having a heart attack. He is not. He is having a panic attack, his first. It does not remain a single episode. Over the next 2 years, it gets worse in the way these things get worse, which is to say, it gets bigger. First the meetings, then the lecture halls. By 1980, he can barely teach. He avoids elevators. He avoids theaters. He avoids restaurants, because in a restaurant you are seated, and seated means trapped, and trapped is where the fear lives. Here is a man whose entire training is in behavioral science. A man who knows professionally more than almost anyone alive about how behavior changes, and he cannot get into an elevator. Everything he tries makes it worse. That is the detail to hold on to. Not that his techniques failed, that they backfired. The harder he worked at not being anxious, the more anxious he became, because working at not being anxious requires scanning for anxiety, and scanning for anxiety finds it. The instrument he was using to solve the problem was the problem. In the winter of 1980 into 1981, there is a turning point that he has described publicly many times since. Alone, on the carpet of his own home, at the bottom of it, he stopped trying to win. Not surrender in the sense of giving up on his life, surrender of the war itself. He resolved, and this is the substance of it, that he would no longer run from his own experience. The fear could be present. He would stop making its absence the condition for living. That is not a therapeutic technique. That is a decision made by a frightened man on a floor. The technique came afterward. In 1981, he wrote the first protocol, which he did not yet call acceptance and commitment therapy. He called it comprehensive distancing. The lab shortened it to Big D. The first study ran through 1981 and 1982. His name is Stephen Hayes. He is now a professor at the University of Nevada, Reno, the originator of relational frame theory, and the man who coined the phrase third wave for the family of therapies, his own among them. That had stopped trying to change the content of your thoughts and went to work instead on your relationship to them. And here is where we have to be careful, and where Hayes himself does us an enormous favor. The obvious move, the move a great deal of content makes, is to say that a Western psychologist rediscovered what Buddhism had known all along, That move is wrong on the history and cheap on the substance, and Hayes has closed it off himself. He has stated plainly that there was no conscious attempt to base this therapy on Buddhism, and that his own training in Buddhism was limited. His colleague, Kelly Wilson, has said that the original group read a Zen book or two back in the 60s and were, in his phrase, running in the opposite direction. What Hayes has said about the overlap is this: I find it very encouraging that the two overlap because ACT did not come from Buddhism or any specific religious or spiritual tradition. It came from modern contextual psychology. If things from very different starting points overlap in their endpoints, to my mind, this increases the chance that they're both onto something. That is the frame for this entire video, and it belongs to him, not to us. Two very different starting points, overlapping endpoints, which is a far more interesting situation than influence would be, because influence explains a resemblance away. Independent arrival does not. So what did he find coming the other way? Hayes' own term for it is clean discomfort and dirty discomfort. Clean discomfort is what life delivers. Loss happens. Bodies age and fail. The people we love die and are not given back. Fear turns up at a faculty meeting for no reason you can name. None of that is negotiable, and no therapy on earth removes it. Dirty discomfort is everything generated by the struggle against clean discomfort. The anxiety about the anxiety, the shame about the fear, the exhaustion of a decade spent arranging a life so that one feeling never gets a chance to happen. Set that beside the two arrows and the shape is nearly identical. First arrow, clean. Second arrow, dirty. One is fired by the world. The other is manufactured on site. Two attributions here, because they get mangled constantly, and this channel would rather be accurate than smooth. First, Hayes' phrase is clean and dirty discomfort, the version you will more often encounter. Clean pain and dirty pain is a looser downstream popularization, and it is regularly put into Hayes' mouth. It is not his. Second, the famous image of the struggle switch, the idea that there is a switch inside you which, when it is flipped on, means every unpleasant feeling has to be fought, is not Hayes either. That is Russ Harris, an Australian physician turned ACT trainer, from his 2007 book, The Happiness Trap. Harris is one of the finest communicators this field has produced. He is not the man who built the therapy, and the distinction is worth keeping straight. And one more lineage note, since it always comes up. Marsha Linen's dialectical behavior therapy also separates pain from suffering and gave us the term radical acceptance. That is a parallel development, not a source. 3 roads if you want to count them. We will keep to 2. So, a discourse preserved in Pali and a protocol typed up in 1981 locate the damage in the same place. Not in the pain, in the fight against it, which leaves the question the next chapter exists to answer. And it is not a small one. If the fight makes everything worse, and it does, and 2 traditions with nothing in common found that out separately, then why does every human mind default to fighting? There is an answer. It has a name in the clinical literature, a large body of evidence behind it, and one serious criticism attached to it that you deserve to hear as well. Chapter 2. If the fight is the problem, the fight should be easy to stop. Just stop. Nobody has ever managed it. Not once, not reliably, not by deciding to. And any account of human suffering that cannot explain why has left out the load-bearing part. Hayes' answer has a name. In the clinical literature, it is called experiential avoidance. And once you have the concept, it is difficult to stop seeing it in other people first, which is the usual order, and then somewhat later in yourself. His plainest description of it is that it means running away from difficult private experiences, not from tigers, from thoughts, feelings, memories, bodily sensations, the interior weather. And the technical definition from a 1996 paper he wrote with Kelly Wilson, Elizabeth Gifford, Victoria Follett and Kirk Strossel adds the clause that turns a common human habit into a clinical problem. Experiential avoidance is the attempt to avoid, escape, or alter unwanted private experiences, and here it is. Even when this leads to actions that are inconsistent with personal values and goals, read that clause again, because everything in this chapter hangs from it. Avoiding pain is not pathological. Avoiding pain is sensible, and you would be dead without it. What makes it a problem is when the avoidance starts eating the life. When the man who is afraid of restaurants stops eating out, then stops seeing friends, then stops leaving the house. Each step perfectly rational as a way of not feeling fear, and each step subtracting something he actually wanted. The fear does not shrink his world, the fleeing does, and this pattern turns out to be almost embarrassingly general. Experiential avoidance is now treated in the literature as transdiagnostic, meaning it does not belong to one disorder. It shows up in anxiety, in depression, in post-traumatic stress, in obsessive-compulsive disorder, in substance use, in suicidality. Different names, different treatment manuals, different chapters of the diagnostic handbook. Underneath a large part of it, one move. Something inside hurts, and the person tries to make it not be there. The opposite pole, in Hayes' system, is called psychological flexibility. His definition of it is worth having in full, because it is the target of the whole therapy. Contacting the present moment fully as a conscious human being, and persisting or changing behavior in the service of chosen values. 6 processes feed it: acceptance, cognitive diffusion, contact with the present moment, self as context, values, committed action. They get drawn as a hexagon, the hexaflex, and grouped into 3 postures: open, centered, engaged. Open is acceptance and diffusion. Centered is present moment contact and self as context. Engaged is values and committed action. 4 of those 6 are where this video lives. 2 of them, before we are finished, are going to turn out to be exactly where the 2 roads separate. Now, a bridge back to the last video, because the 2 texts fit together with a click. The Noble Search Discourse, MN26, asked a question this channel spent an hour on. Why does a person who is himself subject to aging, illness, and death go searching, among things that are also subject to aging, illness, and death, for something to protect him from aging, illness, and death? The Buddha called it the ignoble search, and it is easy to hear that as a rebuke. Foolishness, bad priorities. Experiential avoidance says it is not foolishness at all. It is a mechanism, and it is coherent. I do not want to feel small, so I pursue status. I do not want to feel alone, so I pursue attachment. I do not want to feel uncertain, so I pursue security. In each case, the outer pursuit is a real strategy aimed at a real inner state, and in each case, the strategy is intelligent and well executed and doomed. Doomed for one reason: the inner state was never caused by the outer condition. Status does not reach smallness. Company does not reach loneliness. Security does not reach uncertainty. The arrow is in the wrong body. The ignoble search in this light is experiential avoidance with a budget, which brings us back to the line from the Salatha Sutta that I said would matter again. The untrained person, struck by painful feeling, does not discern any escape from painful feeling aside from sensuality. That is a claim about a missing option. And it is, as far as I can find, the tightest thing in the canon to what Hayes is describing. Pain arrives. The mind reaches for the only relief it has ever located. The reaching is not a moral failure. It is a knowledge failure. In the standard threefold analysis of craving, SN 56:11, this is kama tanha, craving aimed at sensuality. Thanisaro renders it sensuality craving. Bhikkhu bodhi as craving for sensual pleasures. Now I have to slow down and be honest about something, because there is a tempting move here, and a great deal of modern Dharma teaching makes it. That threefold analysis has a third member, vibhava tanha. Thanisaro renders it non-becoming craving. Bodhi, craving for extermination. And you will very often hear it explained as the craving for an unpleasant experience to not be, which would make it a perfect, almost too perfect match for experiential avoidance. The craving for this feeling to stop existing. That reading is defensible as an application. It is not what the canonical and commentarial sources primarily mean. In the texts and in Bodhi's notes, vibhava tanha is an existential and metaphysical craving. The craving for the annihilation of the self, associated with the annihilationist position, Uchedavada, one of the wrong views the Buddha spent considerable time dismantling. It is about existence, not about disliking a sensation on a Tuesday afternoon. So the correct statement is this: the modern experiential reading is an analogy drawn across two different frameworks, a useful one, and I have no objection to a teacher using it. It is not an identity. If someone tells you the Buddha had a technical term for experiential avoidance 25 centuries ago, they have compressed something, and the compression flatters both traditions at the cost of what each actually said. And now the counterweight, because the concept has a genuine weak point, and you should hear it from us rather than from a critic. Experiential avoidance is measured, in most of the research, with a questionnaire, the Acceptance and Action Questionnaire, and its second version, the AAQ2. It is short, it is used everywhere, and it has a documented problem with discriminant validity, which means, in plain terms, it may not be measuring the thing it claims to measure as distinct from other things. Critics have argued that it overlaps heavily with neuroticism and general negative affectivity, that it is, to a substantial degree, a distress thermometer wearing a specialist coat. If that is right, then some proportion of the studies showing that experiential avoidance predicts bad outcomes are showing that feeling bad predicts feeling bad. Alternative instruments exist, most notably the multi-dimensional experiential avoidance questionnaire, built partly in response to this problem. The concept survives the criticism. The measurement is genuinely contested. Both of those are true at once, and a video that told you only the first would be doing you a disservice. Underneath the avoidance, there is a second mechanism, and it is the one where the structural resemblance to Buddhist practice gets closest. Thoughts do not arrive labeled as thoughts. They arrive as reality. I am a failure does not present itself as a sentence occurring in a nervous system. It presents itself as a fact about the world, delivered with the authority of a weather report. Hayes's word for that condition is fusion. The thought and the thinker are welded, and there is no gap in which to stand. Diffusion is the prying apart. The clinical form of it is almost comically simple. Instead of "I am a failure," you practice "I am having the thought that I am a failure." Nothing has been argued. The thought has not been disputed, corrected, or replaced with a positive one. And that refusal to argue is precisely what separates this from the cognitive therapy that came before it. What changes is the thought's grip. That phrase, the cognitive therapy that came before it, is worth a paragraph, because it is the reason Hayes calls his own tradition a third wave. The first wave was behavior therapy, out of the middle of the 20th century. Its subject was behavior. What a person did could be conditioned, extinguished, reshaped. What a person thought was left alone, on the grounds that it could not be measured and therefore could not be worked with. The second wave arrived with Aaron Beck and cognitive therapy, and it did the thing the first wave had refused to do. It went inside. It said that thoughts have content, that some of that content is distorted, and that a person can be trained to catch the distortion and correct it. I think I am a failure. Is that true? What is the evidence? Beck's therapy is one of the real achievements of modern medicine, and it has relieved an enormous quantity of human misery. The third wave, Hayes named it in 2004, and the name stuck, takes the second wave's territory and declines its method. It does not dispute the thought. It changes your relationship to the thought. Whether I am a failure is accurate is, in this frame, the wrong question and a trap besides, because arguing with a sentence keeps you inside the sentence. Underneath all of it sits relational frame theory, the account of language and cognition Hayes published with Dermot Barnes-Holmes and Brian Roche in 2001, and which remains, we will see shortly, the most contested part of the whole structure. Hayes describes the move as backing up from thoughts and attending instead to the process of thinking itself. Anyone who has practiced satipatthana, the establishing of mindfulness, will have recognized something several sentences ago in the third establishing, chittanupassana, contemplation of mind. The instruction is close to procedural. In Thanisaro's translation, when the mind has passion, one discerns the mind has passion. When the mind is without passion, one discerns the mind is without passion. MN 10. Then aversion, delusion, and the rest, in the same flat format. Not, I am angry. The mind has aversion, and it is discerned. That is the same grammatical operation. A state that presented itself as identity is restated as an event that is being observed. Both traditions found that the restatement changes what the state can do to you. And there is now convergent laboratory interest in this. A 2021 study by Zorn and colleagues identified heightened cognitive diffusion as one pathway in meditation-related reduction of pain. But I want to state the limit clearly, because this is the point where cross-pollination videos usually overreach. The move is similar. The destination is not. Diffusion is a clinical technique with a defined job. Loosen a thought's grip enough that a person can act on what they value, instead of on what they fear. That job ends when the person can act. Chittanupassana is one field of four within a practice pointed somewhere else entirely, at seeing the arising and the passing away of what is being observed, at impermanence in what had seemed solid, at release. Satipatthana is not diffusion with incense. Diffusion is not satipatthana with a kopay. They share a hinge and go through different doors. Before we get to those doors, one section that has nothing to do with philosophy and everything to do with whether any of this should change what you do. Does the therapy work? The trial base is enormous. The Association for Contextual Behavioral Science reports more than 1,450 randomized controlled trials of ACT as of early 2026. And I will say plainly that this is the organization's own count, not an independent audit. If you look it up and find a figure around 900, that number is stale. 2 meta-analyses matter, and they disagree. The first, by Achak and colleagues in 2015, pooled 39 randomized trials covering 1,821 patients. It found ACT clearly superior to control conditions, an overall effect size of 0.57, rising to 0.82 against waitlist. Good result. But the same analysis found no statistically significant advantage over established treatments, such as cognitive behavioral therapy. The comparison did not reach significance. The second, by Lars Göran Öst in 2014, was larger and much harder. 60 trials, 4,234 participants. Overall effect, small, 0.42. Öst reported that against his own earlier review, there had been no significant improvement in methodological quality and a deterioration in effect size. Against other cognitive and behavioral treatments, the difference was 0.116, non-significant. His conclusion was that ACT was not yet well established for any disorder. What followed was a fight. In 2017, a group including Hayes himself published a paper arguing that Öst's review had serious methodological problems and should be set aside. Öst published a point-by-point rebuttal in the same journal, reporting that the group had alleged over 90 errors, disputing them one at a time, and maintaining his original evaluation. That exchange has not been resolved. It is worth adding that meta-research on psychotherapy generally finds allegiance effects. Studies run by a treatment's own developer tend to produce larger effects, and Hayes is both developer and, in much of this literature, investigator. So the fair statement in 2026 is this: acceptance and commitment therapy is an evidence-based, widely practiced treatment with a very large trial base and demonstrated superiority over no treatment, over waitlist, and over treatment as usual. The claim that it outperforms good cognitive behavioral therapy is not supported by the evidence. Its underlying theory is still argued about. This matters because you may be considering this therapy or recommending it to someone you love. It works. It does not appear to work better than good cognitive behavioral therapy. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. And that is the ground floor. 2 traditions, 1 shared observation, 1 honest evidence base. Now the part that is actually interesting, because where these 2 roads separate, they do not separate on technique, and they do not separate on evidence. They separate on you. Chapter 3. Ask a person who they are and you will get a story. The job, the marriage, the illness, the thing that happened in 1994. That story is what ACT calls self as content. The conceptualized self, the description a person carries and, when pressed, defends. It is not the only sense of self in the system. There is self as process, the moment-by-moment noticing of what is happening. I am feeling this now. I am wanting that now. And there is a third, which is where the interesting trouble begins. Self as context is the observing self, not the story and not the noticing, but the position from which the noticing occurs. Hayes and his colleagues describe it in a phrase that repays slow reading. The I, here, nowness of consciousness itself is an aspect of self that transcends any particular content of awareness. It is the context of verbal knowing itself. In the therapy room, this gets taught with an image. You are not the weather. You are the sky that the weather is happening in. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, the entire storm of them arrive and pass. And something remains that is none of them, because it is the place they were observed from. Anyone who has spent time with Buddhism has already leaned forward, because this sounds enormously like the territory of anatta, not self. The ground this channel walked in, beyond I am this. Now I need you to be patient with me for about 4 minutes, because nearly everyone gets what follows wrong, including people who are being generous to both sides. The obvious reading goes like this. Act gets partway there. It finds the observer behind the content, stops, and hands the rest to Buddhism, which goes further and says the observer is empty too. Act as beginner's Buddhism. Buddhism as advanced act. That reading is wrong, and it is wrong in a specific and interesting way. Act rests on a philosophy of science called functional contextualism, and functional contextualism holds an unusual criterion for truth, successful working. An idea counts as true insofar as it accomplishes the purpose it was built for. That is not evasion. It is a disciplined refusal. It means the system declines, as a matter of principle, to make claims about what ultimately exists. So when ACT speaks about an observing self, it is not making a metaphysical claim and then losing its nerve at the last moment. It is not making a metaphysical claim at all. The psychiatrist Kenneth Fung, writing in Transcultural Psychiatry in 2015, states it precisely. Act does not make a specific ontological claim about the existence of a permanent metaphysical self, and relational frame theory supplies an account of where the observer comes from. It arises in the course of language development, out of what the theory calls deictic frames. The I versus you, here versus there, now versus then relations that a child has to learn in order to speak at all. Read that slowly, and something surprising surfaces. ACT is not asserting an eternal witness sitting behind your eyes. It is saying that there is a perspective-taking capacity, that language builds it, and that it is clinically useful to stand there. Buddhism is doing something else, not something deeper along the same line, something else. Anatta is a claim, and it is made for a reason. The analysis is not offered as a coping resource. It is offered because seeing that these aggregates are not self is held to end clinging, and the ending of clinging is held to end dukkha, the whole unsatisfactoriness of experience as we ordinarily have it. In that project, the investigation is the medicine. Nothing else is being sold. So, ACT's question is which sense of self is workable in a consulting room on a Tuesday afternoon. Buddhism's question is, what is true about self, and what does seeing that release you from? Different questions, not different depths. Fung makes the same point from inside the clinical literature, that self as context functions as an effective psychological tool, with a different aim from realizing not self in Buddhism, for the purposes of enlightenment. A different aim, not a smaller one, which means I want to retire a sentence you will meet in 100 videos and a good many books. ACT stops where Buddhism goes deeper. It sounds like a compliment to Buddhism. It is built on a misreading, and it quietly costs Buddhism something too, because a tradition does not look more serious for being compared with a straw man. ACT never made the ontological claim that sentence accuses it of stopping short of. Both traditions stop exactly where their own project ends. Neither is a partial version of the other. ACT is not a beginner's Buddhism. It is a therapy that deliberately declined to answer the question Buddhism exists to answer. That brings the second divergence into view, and it follows directly from the first. Complete a course of ACT successfully, and what do you have? A life in which fear, grief, and self-doubt still occur and no longer decide what you do. You bring the feeling with you, and you go to the wedding anyway, make the call anyway, begin the treatment, say the true thing to the person who needs to hear it. Psychological flexibility in the service of a valued life. That is a serious and humane achievement, and most people never manage it. Complete the Buddhist path, and what do you have? Not a better relationship with second arrows. The ending of the process that manufactures them. Not a person who suffers skillfully. The ending of dukkha itself. ACT wants you to stop fighting so that you can live well. Buddhism wants you to see through the mechanism that makes the fighting appear necessary in the first place. Both are real goals. They are not the same goal, and no amount of goodwill turns them into one. The third divergence is the subtlest, and it is the one where I most want to avoid overstating. Acceptance in act is instrumental. That is not a criticism, it is the design. Hayes defines it as a willingness to have internal experience in the service of valued action, and he has been explicit that acceptance is only a starting point, that the real question is what you are going to do with the feeling once you have stopped fighting it. Acceptance is not the destination. It is the door you have to get through in order to walk somewhere. Upekkha, equanimity, sits differently, and it sits in at least 3 places in the canon, which are worth separating because they get blended constantly. It is the 4th of the Brahma Vihara, the sublime attitudes, DN 13, the one that comes after goodwill, compassion, and empathetic joy, and which Thanissaro Bhikkhu describes as both an aid to the other 3 and a check on them. It is a factor of the 4th jhana, DN2, where the standard formula names that attainment purity of equanimity and mindfulness, and it is the 7th of the Bojjhanga, the factors of awakening, SN 46.1. Its position at the end of that list is usually read as meaning it is the summit of the 7. And here I want to pass on a correction, because Thanissaro Bhikkhu has argued directly against that reading. Equanimity is one factor among 7, appropriate on some occasions and not on others. When the mind is agitated, it is what is called for. When energy is low, reaching for equanimity will simply stall the practice. It is not the crown of the list. It is the right instrument some of the time. None of those 3 is primarily a means to something else in the way Akiti's acceptance is a means to valued action. Upekkha is cultivated as part of a path, and in the 3rd sense, it is nearly a mark of that path maturing. And now the honest note, which matters more than the contrast does. Act does not engage equanimity as a technical construct at all. It has no upekkha. The comparison I have just drawn is mine, a researcher's overlay, not a claim act makes about itself, and you should hold it loosely. What the 2 do share, and this is not small, is non-reactivity. The noble disciple in the Salatha Sutta is described as not resistant to painful feeling. That is genuine common ground, which leaves one place where these 2 are not merely compatible, but very nearly the same practical instruction. And it is not the place most people expect. It is not meditation. It is ethics. ACT's treatment of values is one of the best things in it. Values are not goals. A goal can be achieved and crossed off a list. A value cannot. Hayes's image is a compass. Values are directions never arrived at, and in each step, they influence the quality of the journey. You do not finish being a good father. You do not complete honesty. Committed action is then the unglamorous business of choosing the value-consistent behavior again and again, and particularly on the days when choosing it guarantees discomfort. Set that beside sila, usually rendered virtue or morality, and immediately mistranslated in the Western ear as commandments issued from above. They are not commandments. The precepts are sikappada, training rules, and the formula for undertaking them is a first-person statement. KHIP 2. I undertake the training rule to refrain from this. Self-adopted. Taken up because a person has judged the training worth doing, and taken up again when broken, without a tribunal. Structurally, that is remarkably close to what act means by chosen values and committed action. One precision here, because it is exactly the sort of detail that gets flattened and this audience notices. In the Kulavadala Sutta, MN 44, the nun Dhammadina is asked how the Eightfold Path stands in relation to the three aggregates of training, and her answer is not the tidy one people assume. Esala covers right speech, right action, right livelihood. Samadhi covers right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And Panya, wisdom, covers right view and right intention. Right intention, Sama Sankappa, files under wisdom, not under virtue, which sharpens the parallel rather than spoiling it. Acts, values, and committed action resonate with Esla as self-adopted training rather than imposed rule. And they resonate with right intention, which the canon itself treats as a matter of seeing clearly rather than of being good. Where you are actually pointed is, in this analysis, a question of wisdom. That is a stronger claim than moralism, and a more demanding one. This is where the two roads run closest and are least in tension. A therapist and a monastic, standing in front of the same person, would give very nearly the same instruction. Work out what you are actually for, and then behave like it. On the days you feel like it, and on the days you do not. Two roads then. One shared observation about where suffering is manufactured. One shared instruction about how to live. And between them, one question that a therapy declined to ask, and a tradition was built to answer. There is a last thing to say about the arrow. Close. The first arrow is not optional. I want to be very clear about that at the end, because a video about not fighting your experience can be heard as a promise that the pain stops. It does not stop. Neither tradition claims it does, and both of them are more honest on this point than the culture that borrowed from them. The Salatha Sutta is explicit. The noble disciple, the trained one, the one who has done the work, is touched by painful feeling and feels it physically. The text does not soften this anywhere. The training removes the second arrow, and only the second arrow, and the tradition is willing to say the same about the Buddha himself. In the account of his last months, DN 16, he falls seriously ill at the village of Beluva. He does not describe the illness as illusory or as something he stands outside of. He compares his own body to an old cart, kept moving only because it has been strapped together. He was 80. He said what an 80-year-old body is. That detail matters more than any argument in this video. Whatever either of these roads delivers, it is not anesthesia. Nobody here is offering you a life in which nothing hurts. What they are both looking at is smaller than that, and considerably stranger. They are looking at the space between the first arrow and the second. Consider how small that space is. Something happens, a diagnosis, a message that does not come, a joint that gives out on a staircase you have climbed for 30 years. There is the raw fact of it, and then, almost instantly, so fast that it registers as one event rather than two, there is everything that arrives on top. The story about what it means, the argument with reality about whether it should have happened, the projection forward into every year that remains, the resistance, which changes nothing and costs everything. The gap between those two things may be a quarter of a second wide. Nearly everything is decided there. That is the claim both roads arrive at, from opposite directions and for different reasons. A behavioral scientist who could not walk into an elevator found it by watching his own techniques backfire, and then by running trials for 4 decades. A contemplative tradition found it by sitting down and looking, and wrote it into a discourse about a man who was shot twice. Neither of them found it in the other. That is worth pausing on, because it is the entire reason this comparison is worth an hour of your evening. If the therapy had come out of Buddhism, the resemblance would explain itself and mean nothing. A student sounding like his teacher. Hayes has closed that door himself. He says the work came from modern contextual psychology, that his own training in Buddhism was limited, that there was no attempt to build on it. And then he says the thing that gave this episode its shape, that the overlap is encouraging precisely because of that. Because when two enterprises with very different starting points converge on the same endpoint, it raises the chance that both of them are onto something. I would go one step further than he does. It does not only raise the chance that they are onto something, it tells you something about what kind of thing they are onto. If the second arrow were a cultural artifact, an idea that one civilization happened to have, then two civilizations separated by 25 centuries and half a world would not have tripped over it independently. They did, which suggests that the second arrow is not an idea about human beings. It is a feature of them, and then the roads part, and they part cleanly. One of them says, stop fighting, so that you can live the life you actually want, with the fear still riding along beside you. That is a therapy. It works. It does not work better than the other good therapies, and it may be exactly what someone you love needs this year. The other says, stop fighting, and then look at the thing that is doing the fighting, and at whether it is what you have always assumed it to be. That is not a therapy. It is a claim about what is true, offered on the grounds that seeing it is what ends the entire business. Different questions, different destinations, the same first step, which leaves you roughly where both of them leave everybody, with something small and immediate and available. The next time something goes wrong today, and something will, see whether you can catch the quarter of a second, not to fix it, not to do anything sophisticated with it, only to notice the moment when the first arrow has landed and the second one has not yet been fired. You will probably miss it. Everyone misses it. Missing it is not one more failure to add to the pile. Noticing that you missed it is the same skill, arriving late. Stop fighting. Two words that a therapist and a contemplative tradition would both say to you, for different reasons, toward different ends, with exactly the same first step.